One of the popular things you heard a lot heading into this year's NBA Finals, Cavs Warriors 4, but this time it really counts, was that it's not good for the league. It emphasizes the utter lack of parity in the NBA and the lack of spontaneity, the lack of a lot of things, and emphasizes just how predictable everything is, and that ultimately is not good for the product. And I think part of that you could think is true, especially as like a hardcore sports or hardcore NBA fan. It sounds kind of logical. If you head into a season knowing that only a couple of teams can really have a legitimate chance at winning a championship, you feel like the regular season in large part doesn't matter very much, and only a couple of playoff series, up to and including the NBA Finals, are actually worth watching because they're the only ones that matter. That fundamentally seems like it would be a bad thing. But if I can for just a second, I will compare the viewpoint on this to the viewpoint you will see in professional wrestling circles. Some of you may know I do a professional wrestling show on YouTube as well. Link for that will be in the description box. But it's that aspect of hardcore versus casual and mainstream. And sometimes what can happen is you get the hardcore fans here, and they're the most passionate about it, they care about it the most, and they have very strong beliefs and opinions, and often they are the loudest when it comes to expressing those beliefs and opinions, and sometimes can be fooled into thinking that they are the dominant portion of the fan base, that they are the ones that ultimately stir the drink. Now don't get me wrong, you have to have that hardcore base in place. Because if you don't have a foundation, you crumble. You have nothing. So you absolutely have to have them, and you have to have a way to appeal to them, even though in a lot of ways they will continue to be there regardless of what you do. Same thing goes for NBA and professional wrestling. But it is the casual and mainstream viewers that like it, but they don't follow it all the time. They're the ones that will tune in at times, but not all the time. Those are the ones that determine just how profitable your enterprise is going to be, and just how much viewership you actually get, and just how big your brand, your product can actually grow. They might not always tweet about it on social media and write articles about it and sit there and do videos about it, but they are the ones that you ultimately try to reach out to. They are the ones that you ultimately care about, because you feel like those hardcore fans are going to be there no matter what. And while they are loud, and in some cases very loud about their views, their beliefs, and opinions, they are a loud minority. The majority are the casual and mainstream. And the amount you get and don't get of those fans indicates just how successful ultimately your product is or isn't. That goes for wrestling, and it certainly goes for the NBA. Because when you say it was really bad for the NBA, well, from a TV rating standpoint, which is a big freaking deal, obviously, to the league, it really wasn't that bad. Like, you look at Game 1. The Game 1 viewership numbers, like 13.6 million viewers. It was pretty soft, especially compared to 2017 with 15.7 million viewers and 2016 with 19.7 million viewers. It's a soft number, but it's still a monster number. That is still a sizable, significant number, especially knowing historically that Game 1 can be kind of soft in terms of its viewership number for the NBA Finals. But it's still a really good number. And then you look at Game 2. 18.5 million viewers. Yes, while it was less than 2017 that had 19.7 million viewers on average, it was still, this year, Game 2, the third highest watched Game 2 since 2001. Game 3 had 17.9 million viewers. In 2017, you had 20.1 million. But in 2016, you only had 16.5. So when you look at the television ratings, you could say compared to last year, they were a little bit soft, and that is true. But they weren't down that significantly, and they are still a really strong viewership number. And when you look at compared to 2016, when this was only the second straight year they were matching in the finals, the viewership numbers outside of Game 1 aren't that far off. And like I said, for Game 3, surpassed what you had in 2016. So the television ratings suggest that while more people have watched other finals, there were still a lot of people tuning in. There were still a lot of people that cared. Maybe not quite as many casual or mainstream viewers, but there were still enough of them for the NBA to do a sizable viewership number. And it kind of speaks to that disconnection between the hardcore sports fan, the hardcore NBA fan, and kind of what reality actually is. And that is the TV ratings don't lie. While the interest wasn't quite as high, it was still pretty high, and they did some good viewership numbers. And if we want to really break this down, if we're really being honest with ourselves, this is sometimes where I talk about there's recency bias of getting caught up in the BS of how great everything is now and everything's the best it's ever been. But there's also a nostalgia bias, and a nostalgia bias of everything was better in the past, everything that happens now sucks. But when you look at it, when has the NBA really ever had parity? Like, people talk about Bill Russell and the Celtics of the 50s and 60s as they were the greatest dynasty in NBA history. And Bill Russell's the greatest winner in NBA history, and he absolutely is. He won 11 championships in 13 seasons. But that means his team went to 11 NBA finals in 13 seasons. That's not exactly parity. You look at the 1980s. When you talk about the rebirth and the resurgence of the NBA and Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, the Lakers, the Celtics, saving the NBA from the doldrums. Magic and Larry, in some configuration, played in every single NBA Finals between 1980 and 1989, including playing each other 3 out of 4 times between the 84 and 87 Finals. And the only disruption there was 86, when it was the Rockets that faced the Celtics. The Celtics made it to 4 straight NBA Finals between 84 and 87. The Lakers were in 3 and 4 of those finals. That's not parity. Sure, you had the Sixers make it in there for a couple of finals appearances. You had the occasional other team that made it in there. But by and large, that decade was dominated by 2 players and 2 teams. It was dominated by Bird and Magic and the Celtics and the Lakers. That's not parity. Like, as a Jordan fan, as a Bulls fan in the 90s, that wasn't parity. The Bulls were the preeminent dominant force in the league. And while sure, in their 6 NBA Finals trips, they faced 5 different teams, the Lakers, the Blazers, the Suns, the Sonics, and then the Jazz in 97 and 98, the fact is it was the Bulls in the finals each and every year. 91, 92, 93, 96, 97, 98. That's not parity. Because you still ultimately had that feeling of inevitability that the Bulls were winning the championship. The Shaq and Kobe Lakers, they ran the league between 2000 and 2002. And if you were to stretch that out to 2004, when Kobe was really starting to find his ego, they still won 3 championships in a 5-year stretch and made it to 4 NBA Finals in a 5-year stretch. That's not parity. And honestly, when you can look at specific examples where the league may have had parity, it was bad, and if not arguably, the worst stretches in NBA history. The 1970s were terrible. Now, sure, you can't just blame parity or the lack of a dominant team, but based off of the NBA and the way it's structured and the way things work, it was one of many problems. Sure, the Knicks won the title in 70 and 73. The Celtics won 2 titles in that decade. But you had a lot of one-off champions, the Bullets, the freaking Warriors, the Seattle Supersonics in 79, for Christ's sakes. How many people even know that they freaking won an NBA championship? And the league was terrible then. It was absolutely atrocious. And I even look at like 2003 to 2009. Sure, you had the Spurs win in 03, 05, 07. But in that 7-year stretch, you had 4 other NBA champions. You had the Detroit Pistons in 04, the Heat in 2006. You had the Celtics in 2008, the Lakers with Kobe, Gasol, and Bynum in 2009. And I felt like the product was really bad then too. Not 1970s bad, but it wasn't great. The product has gotten better in recent years, even with the predictability, even with the lack of real true competitive teams in the league and tankathons and everything else. So when somebody says that Cavs Warriors 4 was bad for the NBA, I have to ask, what the fuck are you talking about? Now, honestly, as a hardcore sports fan, I could fundamentally agree with that. From a sheer entertainment value standpoint, I couldn't care less about it. I couldn't. But the reality for the NBA and ABC is much different. The NBA and the way it's constructed has always been at its best when you've had a dominant team or a super team or a couple of them running the show. That has not changed. And again, when we get caught up in the nostalgia bias, we forget Bill Russell's team had to go to 11 finals in 13 years for him to win 11 damn rings. Or that for Magic to win 5 titles or for Larry Bird to win 3, that means in some configuration, those two teams, the Lakers and the Celtics, had to make every single NBA Finals between 1980 and 1989. The Bulls had to go to 6 NBA Finals in an 8-year stretch. And even the 2 years that Michael Jordan was off, saving the universe from the basketball-playing aliens called the Monstars, you had the Rockets make it to back-to-back finals, and they took on the Knicks and the Magic respectively, and it just wasn't the same. And even in that case, you had a dominant team, but even then, one of the years, the Rockets were a freaking 6 seed in the playoffs. That wasn't entertaining. That wasn't great. It was cool to see Hakeem the Dream get his 2 rings, that's for sure. But other than that, that's it. We still think about the 94 finals for the fucking white Ford Bronco chase with O.J. Simpson. And in 95, they spanked the Magic, especially after Nick Anderson missed those 4 free throws in game 1. They swept their asses. When it comes to the NBA, and specifically the NBA, you can look at the NHL, Major League Baseball, NFL. They all have parity. And for those sports, it helps them. But historically for the NBA, it is different. It is a lot harder to have parity for a variety of different reasons. And ultimately, the league is best when they don't have parity. So right now, if you looked ahead to next year, and we ended up getting Cavs-Warriors 5 in the NBA Finals, sure, a lot of hardcore sports fans and hardcore NBA fans would bitch about it, but the truth is, people would still watch, and they would still watch in great numbers, and the NBA and the teams in the NBA would still make a lot of money. And viewership numbers would be high, and there would be absolutely no reason to change the formula of anything. Because ultimately, a lack of parity over the years has worked for the NBA, and when they are driven by big stars and great teams, that's when the product in the league is at its best. Sitting there and trying to figure out how to level the playing field sounds great. And believe me, I wish they could. But maybe it's better that they don't. Because even these guys making history and facing each other for the 4th straight time in the NBA Finals didn't really do any damage and didn't really kill anything. It's just more in line with the history of the NBA and where parity doesn't matter.